All right, let's talk about it. What is going to come next for this national team? We talked a little bit about players who we thought had breakout performances, players who we thought had really strong performances. When we talk about somebody like a Rose Lavelle, we talked about it in our previews, Lisa. We said we want to see this sort of budding chemistry with Lavelle, Macario specifically, and see more of that. And I think we've gotten to see a bit more of that over this game series. So when we're maybe looking ahead to this June window, there haven't been any games that have been announced, but it's pretty safe to say that this is likely the last round of matches that this national team will have together before they continue their preparations for CONCACAF World Cup qualifiers in July. So for each of you, I'm going to ask, what do you want to see next for this team in June?
Well, first of all, I'd like to shout out Kirsty B with the Pugh essay.
Are you reading the comments?
Yeah, I love the comments. I love the comments so much. And, also Gabriel, because this kind of lends to what you were just asking about. If you try to beat Spain, which is the strongest team in the world, that is it's subjective, right? I'm no doubt, are they one of the best? But you need a score like Morgan Bryan. She's not even a person anymore. It's Morgan Straw. Alex Morgan.
Lori is
listen, I think it's late. It's late, everybody. I should be drinking during this. I want to see somebody that's going to challenge. I want to see these younger players have to break teams down, because I think I think we could all sit here and say, like, we love the NWSL. It's fun, it's exciting, it's transitional, but it doesn't always ask so many questions tactically of teams, because it can get spread out, right? And then you can start to use more athleticism to when the game starts to become wide open, and it doesn't force you to always have to necessarily think the game, just break teams down in a different way. And then when we typically see that have to happen, there are some breakdowns, right? And we have seen that. And again, this is just the evolution of our women's national team. We've seen that be a struggle for the U.S. national team as well, when there's teams that sit defensively. And I'm not saying in CONCACAF come World qualifying time that teams will necessarily sit back, but they're going to be sophisticated in terms of the soccer and the way that they move the ball. And there's going to be challenges presented to the U.S. team that they're going to have to get through that looked very different than these two games against Uzbekistan and even some of the games in the She Believes Cup. And that is really the questions I think we all have. What does this look like when things aren't necessarily going this team's way, when there isn't a much space for Mal Pugh to start running at this back line, or Rose Lavelle? Because as high on Rose as I am, that hasn't always been the best game for her when things are really tight and there's not a lot of space for her to be able to run, because there's misplaced final passes. We don't circulate the ball all the time that well. That's why there's been a talk about who's going to play in that 6 role. What does that look like? Especially when you have a Sam Ewis out, a Lindsey Herrera that didn't dress tonight. So to me, there's still a lot of questions. But I would like to see a team that's going to present somewhat of like what Czech Republic did, which was really robust defensively and could get themselves forward. Wasn't the most lethal in terms of the attack that anybody's ever seen, but they were really well organized. They were fit, and they didn't allow a lot of space. So positional play becomes a big question. How do you create space for yourself? Where do you free up players? What is the final pass? What does the delivery from out wide look like? Everything has to be that much sharper, right? So
yes, I think we talked about this right at the top of this live, that I agree. I was disappointed that Uzbekistan didn't sit back tonight in this match for the United States, because I think it would have worked to Uzbekistan's favor to kind of just sit back and try to keep the ball in front of them and really play compact and defensive, even within the last 30 yards of the field, because that would have asked so many questions of the United States, especially with Lavelle and Sanchez both in that midfield to start the game, and having Andy Sullivan in that defensive 6 position. And those are the questions that we need to have answered come June, come the next FIFA window, and the potentially final 2 matches for the United States before the qualifiers. I mean, a question about like maybe a send-off series, but I think that U.S. Soccer would try to lump it into this June window as well before the qualifiers come. I have no insight. I'm just spitballing here. Don't worry, people.
We're spreading rumors here on Attacking Third, but we like it.
That's it. I honestly think that it would just be 2 more matches before the qualifiers this summer for this United States. And there needs to be questions answered. So however they go about getting competition, I don't think there's a UEFA matches during that window. Like those could potentially open up some competition for the United States, but they need to figure out how to unlock a team that is very defensively organized, because they're going to see that in CONCACAF. Watching these CONCACAF qualifiers over the last 5 days or so, there are teams that are good defensively and that can score goals, and that can problem solve in the attack and provide much different and a variety of looks going to goal. I mean, Mexico, holy cow. And I know we're going to touch on some of those games that happened, but those are the problems and the tests that the United States needs to be faced with, especially if he's still evaluating Pugh, Macario, and Smith up top.
I hear you. I hear you both. I mean, I think it goes without saying that maybe for that round of June games that are going to come up, that we would like to maybe see a different type of opposition presented to the roster that he names. But I think that's what I'm fixated on when I'm looking ahead and what I want to see next. I think what comes next is it's those June friendlies, and then you got the qualifiers, and we got to start talking about integrating some of these veterans in that have been out of the mix. That's what I want to see next. So I, especially coming out of this She Believes Cup that they just had, and then now these 2 friendlies against Uzbekistan, it was important to have these types of matches, a small mini tournament, right? And you got a pair of friendlies now to kind of hang your hat on a little bit. But even within this Uzbekistan game, when I brought up the fact that, the beginning of both of these matches kind of started very differently. You had a little bit of a longer time to kind of find the breakthrough, and then an immediate breakthrough in that second game against Uzbekistan. And there were moments throughout the match where maybe I wanted to see some of these players who were having good games, but I wanted to see some of them maybe take the shot versus taking the extra pass, or if they were going to make that extra pass, make it a little bit quicker or make a different decision. So there were little moments where you would see and you would say, I wonder what this would look like if there was a Morgan or a Press or a Heath involved in this type of attack. So I think that is also what I want to see come next. I want to see a different look in terms of the opposition, but I also want to start seeing some of these more veteran players getting integrated with some of these other players who have had breakout games over these last couple months, because eventually you're going to have to try to bridge that gap. And what we've seen, and you can attest to this, Laura, what we've seen in the past from head coaches of this national team when it comes to big game moments or tournaments, whether it's a qualifier event or literal Olympics or literal World Cup, oftentimes you have coaches that lean back and look at their veterans and say, okay, I need you, come on board, getting the call up.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking to see that happening for June as well. Hopefully that happens in June before they head off to Mexico for qualifiers in July, because a lot of these players are starting to get their time in Challenge Cup, and we'll probably have some time during the regular season when that kicks off at end of April. So I want to see, I'm in agreement with you both. I want to see a different type of opposition, and I want to see the veterans start coming back into the fold.